Hello, hope you're all doing well, and we've made it to the last chapter of Global Strategic Management. That's chapter 16, and that's on current and future trends in globalization. I think in this chapter, the book is very interesting towards the end when there are a lot of discussions about the plus and minus and some criticism of globalization, etc. I think it's interesting to look at. A lot of it is not all that relevant for business because it's moving ahead anyway. And also, you always remember that this book, one of the reasons I like it is it's chosen from a European perspective. This guy, the writer here, is from INSEAD, which is a fantastic business school, and a lot of the examples, etc., that he uses or brings in are flavored by the perspective of being European, which I think is healthy for us from our American perspective to get a little bit different view. But in this case, I think this is one of the cases where sometimes the future trends and what's happening in the world are looked at a little bit differently from how we would look at those same things. And I think it's valid to see them, but not all of them will ring a bell with you as much. However, I think the key thing here is to think about what's going to happen in the future. Is there some way to think ahead, and what can we do about that, and what can we is there a way to not predict it exactly, but to kind of anticipate at least what may happen in the future? And I think it's useful. Whenever you're doing strategy, when you're doing a strategy, what you're basically doing is making some projections, some forecasts, even some bets on what way things are going to go in the future. Because part of your strategy is your budget, your forecast, your elements of numerical quantification of what happens when you implement what you're doing. So anyone that's working on strategy, multinational or otherwise, will be peering off into the future to see if they can accurately define and determine the things that are going to happen now that will lead to some kind of future outcome. So it behooves us to see what we can, how things are shaping up, and that should influence how you go forward. So when you look at the first slide here, please do call up the slide presentation on this one. That's from chapter 16. First of all, the future isn't what it used to be. That's a funny thing to say, but it's true. There are a lot of things that people perceive that are going to happen, and they don't. Often what I have seen a lot is that it doesn't happen quite as fast as people think, but often these trends do occur. It just isn't quite as quickly as it could be because of some resistance and some infrastructure issues that need to happen. But often the trends do occur. I think it's safe to say that globalization is here to stay, inevitable and ongoing. And most companies are building around that, no matter what size they happen to be. You keep that in your mind that it's a global world and it's becoming more and more interconnected all the time. But there may be other issues. You have to identify, when you look in the future, what are the social, demographic, political, scientific developments that affect the world of economics and business. And some of them are already there, and others are kind of hinted at or hidden. And when you think about the future in broad terms, people think, well, it's going to be more globalized. Some people think it's going to be more fragmented, and some where it's going to be somewhere in between. There has been more fragmentation in some areas in recent times. You have a lot of elements, that are impacting the world and kind of ripping it apart, and there's less of this sort of optimism. Everything's going to be happy and one big happy global family, which is probably maybe not even the right thing or good thing. But you are seeing more fragmentation. You're seeing a lot of nationalism based around all sorts of differences that people have that are quite pronounced and even dangerous to go against. So it's not quite as open as people thought. It's not that many years ago that things are affected more than we thought we were going to be on these other differences and motivations and agendas that different interest groups have. In this Millennial Project, you'll see in your book, and they came out with these 15 global challenges plus a couple, and it's interesting to look at those. I think that these are the issues. Now, for business, that what I think you can do is say, these are things I have to deal with, but also these are ways that maybe if I satisfy some of these things, you can make more money, or you can do different things, or you can somehow positively impact your company or your consumers or your etc. So, but these are out there. How can everybody have clean water? We have so much water here in Florida, it's hard to imagine that for so many people, just regular water is so difficult to obtain. We get more rain in 3 or 4 days than a lot of places get in 2 years. So it's totally different for us, but it's a big issue. Any kind of food issue, the world produces enough food, but so much waste and inefficiency and political agendas prevent it from getting to people. In fact, here in the United States, here in South Florida, like 1 in 5 kids goes to bed hungry at night. It's just incredible, but it's true. How can democracy emerge from authoritarian regimes? You see such swings. For a while, it looked like things were going very leftist in Latin America, for example. Then it becomes more right wing, and then it becomes more democratic. And then you see countries like Venezuela, used to have one of the longest standing democracies in Latin America, just be complete disaster. And how does that happen? And the suffering that's brought on those people is amazing. So how can ethical economy? And so you look at those things and see these are issues that are affecting us and will be in our way as we go forward. Artificial intelligence, how's that going to play out with the push on that? How can it be a positive benefit to mankind? You all are familiar, or maybe it's a few years before your time, but not much. The movie series about the Matrix. You slap the headphones on and the eyepiece, and you're kind of in the Matrix. And I think people tend to want to do that more and more. So you'll see how artificial intelligence impacts not only business, which on a positive way in terms of getting you what you want faster and clearing up inefficiencies, but also what people do for entertainment, how they spend their time. Education, how is education working? I mean, education, we could talk about that forever, especially when you're all in college now, but it's changing a lot. It's got to change more. What is the purpose, the role, the function of our educational processes here in the U.S. and around the world? So then the next slide is that, we naturally tend to think that things are getting better, but then I think we looked at one of the lectures earlier on where the perception of a lot of people is not getting better. However, it's funny that there are a lot of really positive things around the world. You have a clear increase in gross national income per capita around the world. There's an overall reduction in poverty. There's the increase in direct investment. All these are on a slide you can see there. Their increase in women in business and in politics and all sorts of things. You see in our own country the unemployment levels are way down across every race and geography and gender. There's a greater energy efficiency, improved water sources. There's a decrease under nourishment and all sorts of things. You see, population is a bit slower, life expectancy is increasing, and there are all sorts of things. So there are a lot of good things, literacy, etc. However, we're seeing sometimes in some of the countries there's a greater unemployment, not in the U.S. right now, but at other places. And even in the U.S. there's a higher employment, but some people think, yeah, but what kind of jobs? I don't want that kind of job. We still see a lot of fossil fuel and cement production. Cement is one of the more polluting greenhouse gas type thing because of the way it's made and the need to transport it. You see overall emissions. You don't see as much R&D expenditures as you were seeing. Not growing. You see some of the big pharmaceutical companies recently announced they're not going to do more research into creating more antibiotics because there's no money in it for them. But we really need those because the superbug type infection things are increasing way more than they were just 20, 30 years ago. There are a lot of wars around, a lot of armed conflicts. People are fighting all over the place, and it has, of course, a human toll, a financial toll. It's just a terrible thing. So, and you see, maybe not so much in the U.S., but even in the U.S., increasing levels of corruption around the world. And the big thing is income inequality. It's it's true that if you looked over the last 30, 40 years, there's a, you might see all different levels of people moving up, but the differences are expanded, and that makes people unhappy, and maybe rightly so. Terrorism is completely different after 9/11 than it was before that, as a watershed moment for the U.S. and for around the world, where you used to see rare acts of terrorism, and now it's everyday acts of terrorism, so around the world. So that's a big difference. So these are things that you have to deal with. I think in one of our other discussions, we already looked at these next on the predictions. You've been asked to comment on those, so I won't go over those now. Let's look at this slide on what's happening now. I think, you look at on March in 2017, a year ago, Apple, their market cap, now it's $1 trillion, and they've all gone up. So you see Apple, Google, Microsoft, Amazon, Facebook, the traditional FAMGA companies, have huge percentages of the economy and impact on the world. It's just astounding how much impact these 5 companies have on what's going on in your life, in my life, and everybody's life around the world. So, 11 years ago, the top 5 market cap companies in the U.S. were Exxon, GE, Microsoft, British Petroleum, and Citigroup. So, what a difference, no? What a difference you're seeing in just 10, 11 years, where the technology-based, digital-based companies have completely overwhelmed, not only in replaced them, but also in the size is incredibly different in a short amount of time. You say, well, that's 10 years. 10 years is like that when you see this kind of change, very quick to occur. And I think that's, when you look into the future, you have to consider that, will that trend even accelerate, which it has been since the last year, or will something else happen? But it's clear that it's easy to see that these traditional type companies, where there's a bunch of buildings, manufacturing, risk taking based on all these different things, have been overwhelmed by companies that are using digital means to approach their clients to their business. In advertising, 16, I've checked the same as 18. These 5 companies have, as far as internet advertising, they have it all. So they've really absorbed. You see, well, advertising is going up. It's just a few companies, and they're the ones that are advertising. You see the growth in these, and what, who's spending, who's doing the advertising, who's influencing. And that's why they have so much impact on your behavior and your thought processes, because they are the ones advertising. You can see from AI, from artificial intelligence patents, that these few companies are doing that. What they do is they either develop it or they go out and buy it. So whoever has the patent, that's what they're thinking of. They're either, because of the type of business they're doing, they're internally growing it, or they're out there just acquiring it from other people that have thought up things. So these companies, and if you can throw HP in there, Sony, Fujitsu, they have. As soon as somebody comes up with something that's remarkable or innovative, they go get it. So, and they have the resources to do that. We have laws in this country about antitrust, and the concept of antitrust laws is that you're not supposed to have dominance by any one company that would exclude competition and therefore inhibit the benefit to consumers. However, you can see that what they're saying is that there's clearly a monopolistic or over dominance in these 5 companies. However, you'll say, well, am I being hurt as a consumer? For you, are you being hurt because you have to buy an Apple phone? Maybe I'm not being hurt. I don't want to see it broken up. Sometimes breaking up these companies and doing that isn't that beneficial. But the point is that when you have a fairly clear case of a total dominance by certain companies, that it's not being stopped by the regulatory and legal processes that are currently in place. They could be attacked on this ground, but they're not, and I don't think they will be. So I don't think you're going to see, Microsoft has had some issues here, but quite a while back. It was many years ago that they actually had to respond and change their business model a bit based on antitrust and but that's been a long time. So I don't see this changing so much. And you see this next slide that you see these 5 companies are 58% of the S&P 500 performance, and that's going on like that. So I think the point there is that when you look to the future, you see it's becoming more digitized, more information based, and that obviously you're living that you make sense to you. But for businesses, if you're getting into the strategic area of business, how do you deal with that are going to be challenges and things you have to think about. I included here just a quick little thing on how we can predict the future. Remember we had one of our discussions on the strategy development process. If you go back to that and apply that, because like I said, when you're thinking of strategy, you're also thinking about the future. So if you want to just sit around, and think about as soon to be graduating college students, and what's going to happen? What should I do about it? You can kind of apply a strategic process to your future. You're thinking about the future. It works quite well. You don't do all the steps. Basically, you want to think of what your goals, and as a person, what do you want? What does your company want, or what do you want personally, or if you're sitting around with your company, or you're thinking about what should we be doing, you figure out what the goals are, and then you go through the same kind of steps when you're doing strategy, because you're working with what you have. So you do your SWOT analysis, and who are your competition, and you start thinking of ideas. So and you think, and it's like even just the information we just covered in this little talk. That's information that's very important. So you think, let's factor in what we know. Who are we? What do we want? What kind of company do we have? And what do we know out there? What do we see out there in the world? And that makes you start. And it's that combination of facts and a combination of goals that starts generating your ideas. So you start thinking of your ideas. What ideas fit with what I want and with what I see and what I know, and you keep doing research on every time you don't know something, find out. Then your ideas become more sharper and sharper, and then you start testing those ideas with logic, as we discussed previously. Will these ideas work? And again, how you test ideas with logic is always answering those same 6 questions. Why do we want to do it? How would we do it? How do we know it'll work? Who is going to do it? When can we expect that to happen? And if we do it, what is going to be the outcome? If you go through this process, and then after that you come up with the action steps and etc., you will start being a futuristic type thinker. And it's not only is it pleasant to use your mind in this way, but it can be effective and get you ahead in business. It always works when you may not always have the right answer, but you're going to go through the satisfying process of thinking and coming up with solutions and thinking about it rationally and being a real contributor. And I think that's what we want to do when we're in our jobs, is that a lot of times you're in your job, it's not that fun. But what you want to do when is something, you want to be in that table, you want to be in that room, you want to be in that team that starts thinking about what we're going to do next, where we're going to go, what's the future going to be like, and this process will help you. If you sit in that room and say, let's just think of this. What do we want? Who are we up against? What's the situation out there? Let's come up with some ideas. Now, okay, those are good ideas, but let's just go through them a bit one by one and see if they work. Then now we've found the ones that work. How can we implement them? I'll tell you, this will work for you and it'll be fun. Okay, so we already did that. Yeah, these are just challenges. Anyway, that's that. I think I really encourage you to do that. I think thinking about the future is a lot of fun. I as you can tell, I have a strong affinity towards strategy, which I fundamentally is kind of a hypothesis on the future that you test, and I think that's what this multinational strategy and all their strategy things are fundamentally all about. So anyway, that's our last lecture. I hope you've enjoyed this book and these lectures, and I hope it really comes to some benefit to you in your future career. All right, thanks a lot.